Are we really doing this? Again? And Dave Franco, of all people, is playing the main male romantic lead. That's not really what I thought would eventually get him a mention here on my channel. I thought it would be a cutaway reference to something else.
Has anyone approached you to play Luigi? To play hot Luigi?
Anyone? Do you mean everyone?
Okay.
I've never received more texts in my life about anything.
Ferre, Armani, and Versace.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Once again, there is another film adaptation of a book, so I have gone and read that book to tell you some of what's in it, and perhaps give a couple of thoughts along the way about the adaptation of said material. Today, I'm going to be talking about the book Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. By the time you are watching this video, I'm going to be out of town, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough videos pre-recorded to hopefully avoid any overly long gaps in videos being published here on my channel. Typically, I focus more on films and what's being released in the cinema at that exact moment in time, but since I'm going to be away and have that disruption in my routine of going to the cinema more or less every week, this seemed like a reasonable option to be among the pre-recorded videos I will be publishing while away, all of which are getting into the source material of various upcoming adaptations. So by the time you watch this video, I will probably also have already published a video sharing information about the Stephen King novella, The Life of Chuck, which is set to be released as a Mike Flanagan film first thing in June. The Regretting You film, however, isn't scheduled to be released until October 24th. I don't know if that release date will move at some point. See, I follow along with enough of the film ongoings to know that release dates move far more often than the general audience might realize. For example, Ryan Coogler's Sinners was originally supposed to release in March of this year, but it ended up needing more time in post-production, so it swapped release dates with Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17. I don't really know why they didn't have Mickey 17 with the earlier release date in the first place, considering that that film was originally supposed to be released last year, but got delayed because of the SAG-AFTRA strike. So Mickey 17 had been ready to go. So I checked this book out from my local library. I'm going to remind you, the audience, as I always do, to get a library card because doing so helps libraries with their funding. Even if you are not the most active in checking out books, by simply getting a library card, you will help the libraries. And library cards are free. You can read books for free. Libraries are magical. Imagine if I had had to buy this for a YouTube video.
Ugh.
I've enjoyed doing this series here on my channel of reading a book or written work before the adaptation because it helps me to study the adaptation process in general, regardless of whether or not I like the original work, the adaptation, both, or neither. Adaptation is something I've grown increasingly interested in, and doing these videos is a much cheaper thing to do than go to film school because library books are free! Get your library card! Regretting You is messy. Has the mood ever struck you to watch someone else's mess? Well, buckle up because you're about to be elbow deep in mess when I tell you all about the car crash of this book.
But I knew who they were, and I told her who they were. Shitheads.
The story focuses on a mother, Morgan Grant, who will be played by Allison Williams. She is best known for films like Get Out, The Megan Duology, and The Perfection. Miss Allison Williams has quite a bit of experience in the horror genre, so she's more than qualified at this point to be in a Colleen Hoover adaptation.
You ever accidentally download a bad episode of Burn Notice?
The story begins with Morgan's 34th birthday. She is married to her husband Chris, who was her high school boyfriend, and she got pregnant with their daughter Clara when she was 17. Is it Clara or Clara? I don't know. I might go back and forth. Now, Chris is played by Scott Eastwood. When I looked through the cast before I had read the book, I had thought to myself, are they going to try to make this man a romantic character? I hope not, because he's far more believable to me as a villain. Did any of you see Wrath of Man? Because I did. And he has a villain face, so he was very believable in that role. And then I read the book, and I found out what a nefarious, treacherous, slimy, low-life piece of garbage his character is. And then I went, yeah, okay, we can work with this. But more on that in a moment. Clara is their 16-year-old daughter who has her 17th birthday near the very end of the book, and she is played by Mckenna Grace. Her love interest, Miller, is played by Mason Thames? I don't know if that's actually how he pronounces it, but that is how you say the name of the river in London, so I will stick with that for the time being. Mason is probably best known for his lead role in The Black Phone. I believe that was the first project I ever saw him in. The Black Phone 2 is also coming out later this year, just 1 week before Regretting You, so I'm assuming he will be pulling double duty with the promotional press work at that point in time. Another credited actor in Regretting You is Willa Fitzgerald, who is best known to me for her work in Mike Flanagan's Netflix series, The Fall of the House of Usher. That is my favorite of Mike Flanagan's series. Now, at the time of recording this, it doesn't officially list on IMDb that she's playing Jenny, but there is really no other character she would be playing, so I will just say that that's who she's playing. Jenny is Morgan's younger sister by 1 year, and at the beginning of the book, we are introduced to Jenny as recently having had a baby named Elijah with Jonah after they had a one-night stand that took place after Jonah's father's funeral. Jenny and Jonah also dated in high school at the same time that Chris and Morgan were dating and Morgan got pregnant. Clancy Brown is also listed in the cast, Mr. Krabs himself, and although his character isn't officially listed either, there is really no one else he would be playing other than Gramps, who is Miller's grandfather and guardian. The Regretting You book alternates between the perspectives of Morgan and Clara. Each chapter alternates back and forth between their perspectives for the entire book. Now, when I did my video on the Housemaid book, I was very thorough in going through each chapter and retelling more or less everything that happened. A lot of my motivation for doing that was because I really liked the ending of The Housemaid, so the build-up of reaching that ending made me more willing to take viewers through all of those details from the book. I do not have the same level of excitement about Regretting You as a book. I am also recording this video mere days before I am set to leave for my trip, and I still need to pack and return that book that I just showed you to my local library. So I hope you'll be okay if I just speed through quite a few of these details and not recap every single detail in the exact order it was presented in the book. I have, however, taken a copious amount of notes so that when it comes time for the film to come out, and I have already long since returned the book to the library by that point, I will have a fair bit of information readily available to refer back to in order to cross-reference various details that I might have otherwise forgotten by the time the film comes out. One of the things I'm very curious about with this adaptation is not as much about the actual material that will be in the film, but more so how it's going to be marketed, because there's a very big dramatic reveal that happens early in the book, and I'm curious about whether or not they're going to reveal that in the trailer, or simply let the people who show up none the wiser to experience that reveal in the cinema if they haven't read the book. If I were to make an educated guess, I think they will put more of an emphasis on the two romances that are happening in the book at the same time, and also lean into the emotional drama of struggling to deal with the grief of losing loved ones. I don't know whether showing the reveal in the trailer makes more sense financially to incentivize people to show up, but I think that I personally would find it funnier if I were to go to the cinema and be surrounded by women, many of whom don't know the reveal before it happens, and then getting to hear the audible reaction of them when it does get revealed. So now let's get into all of the plot spoilers for the book, or at least the ones I will be talking about today. And by extension, there will probably be spoilers about what's in the film, since I'm assuming they will stick to a fair bit of what's in the source material. Enter Morgan Grant, 17 years old, in denial about having feelings for Jonah, while she is dating Chris and has been for the last 2 years. Morgan's 16-year-old sister and best friend Jenny is dating Jonah, and Jonah is Chris's best friend. Do you smell that? Mess. In completely unsurprising news, Jonah also has feelings for Morgan, but neither one of them does anything beyond some very intense eye contact at various points and yearning. Nothing ever happens between them that could be officially classified as cheating. While they're teenagers, there is a mention of Morgan getting a watermelon Jolly Rancher out of Jonah's car console. The book has a lot of details like these where if the film finds itself really pressed for time, or if it feels disruptive to the pacing of the screenplay, some of those details could get cut out. The thing with the watermelon Jolly Ranchers is that they're Morgan's favorite flavor, and in this opening, she says that he doesn't like this flavor, so that's why he always has that flavor left over and she is able to partake. In completely unsurprising news, Jonah doesn't actually hate that flavor. He just keeps them in supply because he has feelings for her and he knows that she enjoys them. In the next chapter, 17 years onward, Jonah gifts Morgan a gallon-sized bag full of watermelon Jolly Ranchers, and then further into the book, she sees him eat one and she's confused because, wait a moment, didn't he hate that flavor? And he tells her, no, girl, I had them around because I like you. There's something kind of like this for Clara and Miller's relationship as well. Not so much a secret, but a specific detail. When Miller and Clara are getting to know each other after they've begun dating, she asks him what his favorite color is, and he says his least favorite color is orange, and they harp on that quite a bit. They end up teaming up to do a video project together because he wants to be a director and she wants to be an actress, but there's a lot of melodrama in the story that by the time they're actually getting around to completing this video project, they want to do something more light in tone. So they do a mockumentary about hating the color orange and how orange is this evil, dangerous color. It's not particularly funny in the book, but maybe the film can manage to make it come across more so that way. The book ends with them seemingly realizing that they will both be able to attend the University of Texas, and there is a joke about how the school's color is orange, and Clara also got a prom dress in the most hideous shade of orange she could find. Weird, but they're teenagers. But now let's get to the big drama of this story. The big inciting incident of the story is that right after Morgan's 34th birthday, she gets a call that Chris is in the hospital. He got in a car wreck. She tries calling Jenny, but gets no answer. When she is at the hospital, Jonah arrives not long after her, and he's confused when she's asking him about trying to get in touch with Jenny. And he reveals that he was called to the hospital because Jenny was in a car wreck. Guess what, ladies and gentlefolks? Chris was driving the car. The car belonged to Jenny. She was in the car with him because they were having an affair. Jenny lied, and she said that she was going back to work that day after maternity leave. But nope, they were off at a hotel together, cheating. And that new baby, Elijah, Maury Povich called, and he would like to inform you that, Chris, you are the bio father.
Demon! I will kill you as many times as I have to.
Morgan is very briefly in denial when she and Jonah first have this realization, but it very quickly sinks in that that is in fact what was going on. The two of them eventually find that Chris was also hiding letters and cards from Jenny, which he kept in his toolbox, which he kept a lock on. And one of my biggest pet peeves about reading this book is that at the end of the story, when Morgan has gotten all loved up with Jonah, and they're both finally open and honest about loving each other and having loved one another for so many years, Morgan just rips those things up without ever reading them because of, I don't know, personal growth or something to that effect. Listen, that's fine and all, good for you, but you don't get to just introduce those things to the audience and not tell us what's in them. Are you serious? We are here to be nosy about what the heck is going on in here on this day. You tell me what they did. When did it start? Because the fact that Jenny went to meet up with Jonah at his father's funeral and hook up with him right after that, and they never 100% confirmed this, but they do play around with the idea that maybe she knew she was pregnant by that point and that Chris was the father, and maybe she went and hooked up with Jonah specifically to create a cover to keep this affair hidden. And if that's the case, that's sick, it's deeply insidious, and you won't even let us be nosy about what's in those letters and cards? Now, books in general are limited by things like the format of being in specific characters' POVs. Films, however, are able to take a step back and play around more with being able to show the audience things that the characters themselves might not be privy to, either initially or ever. I would prefer they change this detail about the book. I think it's more satisfying, especially to a general audience, if you show those letters to the audience, even if Morgan never reads them herself. At least throw a couple of lines on screen for us to get a sense of what those demons were doing with each other. When Morgan and Jonah realize at the hospital what was happening between Jenny and Chris, she comes up with a cover story about how Chris had a flat tire, so Jenny had to give him a ride to work because both of them worked at this very hospital that her and Jonah are currently waiting in after this bombshell news. Morgan doesn't want to tell Clara about what really happened because even though Chris is public enemy number 1, he's now in the ground and he had it coming. He only had himself to blame. Morgan feels that Chris was a good father to Clara, and this loss of both her father and an aunt that she felt really close to is so much for her to deal with. So Morgan doesn't want to taint those memories of them to Clara. She's being selfless for two truly awful people whom I only wish were still alive so she could get rid of them herself, because I love to watch a feminine rage era. But alas, no, this is not a feminine rage story, which is why my enthusiasm about an adaptation is lukewarm at best, particularly when I have no trailer to perhaps incentivize me to be more excited. Before I circle back to explaining a bit more about the plot, I will mention that I think a fair bit of the film's potential appeal to a larger audience will be heavily dependent on the chemistry of the actors themselves. If you don't really believe and feel on a visceral level the romantic connection between Morgan and Jonah, and even the teenage couple of Clara and Miller, I don't think it will be able to capture as much of the audience that could potentially be more inclined to enjoy this type of story. Even though there are other emotional and thematic elements about how to cope with grief and loss and the importance of honesty, since a lot of the drama comes from keeping secrets and then everything that piles up as a result of those secrets and as a result of not being fully open and honest and communicative with the people you're supposed to be closest to. If we talk about how you market a film like this and how you draw in that audience, especially a wider general audience, you need the romance to be convincing. I will definitely need to see a trailer to try to gauge the casting choices, because it's not as much about whether or not I believe that those specific actors can act in a general sense, as it is about whether or not they make me feel something when they look at each other. It's all about the yearning, especially for Morgan and Jonah, where you have more or less 2 decades of pent-up romantic tension waiting to burst. Okay, now back to the plot. When Morgan makes this decision about saying that Jenny was the one driving because Chris had a flat tire and so he needed a ride to work, that more or less sets off the entire dramatic conflict that proceeds to play out between her and Clara, because Clara had been texting Jenny, and no joke, Jenny was in the middle of telling Clara, "You don't want to be the other girl. Trust me." And then when Clara is trying to get more information out of her about whatever it is that she's talking about, some occasion during which she was the other woman, Jenny has stopped texting back. So Clara spends a sizable amount of this story believing that she caused the car wreck. But because Morgan and her are both so caught up in their grief, and they're not opening up to each other fully, and they're being eaten away by these secrets, they keep getting into arguments. And then those arguments just escalate into larger arguments. For example, when Clara walks in on Jonah and Morgan kissing, it's the first time those two have ever kissed. But she proceeds to believe that those two are having an affair and were before their loved ones died. And it isn't until they actually start to tell the truth that the relationship they have is able to turn back into a mostly positive one. Clara gets drunk after her 17th birthday dinner goes horribly awry, and she got into arguments with her mother, as well as her boyfriend Miller. They're officially dating by that point. And while Clara is drunk, she admits to Morgan that she blames herself for this car wreck. So the next day, when she is sober again, and Morgan asks her about what she said, Clara finally opens up about how she had been texting Jenny, but she didn't know that Jenny was driving while she was texting her. And Morgan immediately says, "No, it's not your fault. Your father was driving, and I never would have told you otherwise if I had known you were going to blame yourself." But then, of course, Clara asks her, "Well, why would you tell me that if it wasn't true?" And Morgan panics because she didn't mean to reveal all of this. But Clara presses her and is able to put 2 and 2 together, and she realizes, oh, these 2 dead people were no good, horrible cheaters. And she's very upset at learning this, but she's not upset at her mother, especially once she has a bit more time to really think about everything. She knows that her mother is selfless, and despite Clara only being 17, she is very aware of the people around her that are closest to her and how they are. She has this thought that if the roles had been reversed, and if it had been her mother who passed away while having an affair with someone, that her father, Chris, would not have been selfless in trying to protect Clara's memories of her. That was even more of an indictment to me of this man's character. Because how is it that your daughter, who loves you very much, the same night she finds out that you are a disgusting, evil, cheating man, she goes, "Yeah, my mother, whom I've been fighting with for months in the aftermath of your death, She's a more selfless person than you.
Okay, mamacita. Nope, that's appropriation.
Now, I haven't said much about the other romance of this book, which is Clara and Miller, other than their weird inside joke about his hatred for the color orange. Initially, when they were introducing Miller, I couldn't tell if I was going to like him because it hadn't been made clear yet whether or not he was going to be a cheater, just like Clara's disgusting father. But the plot twist of it all is that he's actually a very nice person. He's very emotionally sensitive and considerate of Clara, especially for a teenage boy. He has had to grow up a bit more quickly because his mother died when he was 10. His father is away in jail, and Miller no longer has or wants to have a relationship with him. His grandfather, Gramps, is now his guardian, and Gramps often makes this morbid joke about how his wife left him, but the truth is that she died and they were happily married for 52 years up until that point. And Gramps is getting older, he's getting sick, and by the end of the book, they have a full-time aide at home helping to take care of him. But that does do a fair bit to shape Miller into being a really nice guy. He's had a crush on Clara for years, ever since he saw her do a 2-minute monologue in the school play when she was 14 and he was 15, and he just thought she was very cool and epic. Gramps tries to embarrass Miller by revealing that story to Clara more than once, but whenever he tries to tell it, Miller stops him. But eventually Miller shows her what Gramps was trying to say because Gramps had been filming this whole thing. Also, her character in the play was named Nora, and Miller proceeded to name his car Nora, and Clara didn't realize that he had done that, and for that reason, until she saw the video clip. There are more details I could share, but I would say that overall, Miller won me over once we were maybe a third or halfway through the book, somewhere around there. I didn't do a page count and divide it up. In adapting these two main romantic relationships, I think that some of the most important things the film needs to do to make them successful are to showcase the chemistry between these pairs of actors, which hopefully they have and took into consideration when choosing who to cast. But I would also say that you'll want to make sure they're offering the audience different vibes so as to not make the overall viewing feel too monotonous. Clara and Miller are teenagers. They have more humor and banter in their interactions with one another, whereas Jonah and Morgan tend to lean more so in the direction of angst and repressed romantic tension. Both relationships have various peaks and valleys throughout the story, but when I think about other romantic dramas or romantic comedies that focus on more than one couple, the variety in relationship dynamics can do a lot to enhance the overall viewing experience and the narrative. With the previous adaptation from this author from print to screen, I really didn't enjoy reading that source material. There were a lot of issues that I had with it that I felt were going to need to be altered to both better suit the film medium in a general sense, but also just change things in the narrative so that the material would not be received extremely poorly by a general audience that had no prior knowledge or devotion to that source material. But with Regretting You, most of the changes that come to mind that I would propose feel like ones that are just inevitable alterations to make when you switch from print to screen, and you are no longer limited by the very specific perspective of whichever character has the POV of that chapter. I've seen that change applied numerous times when adapting from print to screen, and I much prefer it because I do like to have that more holistic perspective of the narrative as a whole and the various characters that receive the most focus within that narrative. I don't have an emotional attachment to the source material, so if they were to make a fair few changes to the material in the adaptation process, I'm quite open to that, just as long as the film works, hopefully, well in its own right. Some changes are also inevitable because books will often put a lot of focus on things like introspection and contemplation, just any type of thing that is happening internally. If you keep that exactly as is and copy and paste it onto the screen, you're probably going to just show a character sitting there thinking. The main change I would pitch, as far as some sort of notable shift in the narrative itself, is what I said before. Morgan needs to read those letters and cards. That's one of the most glaring issues that stuck out in a negative way in the narrative. It really came across more like it's letting Morgan's apparent resolution or realization be that ignorance is bliss. No, you've been lied to. Your daughter's been lied to. Jonah's been lied to. And if those nefarious people hadn't died in this car wreck, they would have lied to Elijah as well. It's time for the truth to surface. Read what's in the letters. And then once you are finished, you can rip them up, throw them away, burn them, dump the ashes into a landfill for all I care. But it really felt like you were leaving something unresolved, even if it's not for Morgan herself, but for the audience. Despite there being some very nice resolutions and developments, breakthroughs for various characters and relationships elsewhere, giving your 4 main characters happy endings, plus baby Elijah, those letters were the one standout sore spot for me. They kept cutting back to them. Oh, Jonah doesn't want to read them, but let me just take them and throw them in my room. I'll deal with them later. Oh, I've returned to the room and they're still there. Let me just hide them in my dresser so that Clara hopefully doesn't find them. I thought that that was a setup for Clara to find them because you said you didn't want that to happen. But no, you just have other things happen and then we return to the letters at the end of the story so that you can rip them up and throw them away without reading them. Get out of my face. I will get the tape and reassemble these pieces like a jigsaw puzzle. The other main alteration I would make is to just make any and all coffee shop scenes be in an unnamed coffee shop. They name drop Starbucks repeatedly. No. We're boycotting. I will dock a star if you put that company in this movie. But I will be circling back to other books that are set to be adapted into films. There is one film in particular that's coming out this year that I didn't even realize until recently was based on a book. My library doesn't have it listed in their online database, so I had to go and request it in person, and hopefully it will be available to check out by the time I return from my trip. Something sort of similar happened to me this year where I had wanted to read Mickey 7, the source material for Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17, but the online waitlist was just not moving, so I looked more closely at it and I had realized that someone checked their book out ages ago and never returned it. So I spoke to one of the librarians and I let them know that I was interested in the book and that it seems to be MIA, which probably isn't the best situation for them to be in when an upcoming film adaptation from the Bong Joon-ho was going to be coming out soon. So they went and got a new copy and I checked it out and made my video. Get your library card and communicate with your librarians because they are there to make sure that you can read those books. Overall, with Regretting You, despite the big, dramatic, inciting incident that jumpstarts the story of the double character deaths of those nefarious, selfish adulterers, and Clara eventually learning the truth about that, in a general sense, I don't feel as though the book is particularly plot-driven. It's more so emotionally driven. It's about being emotionally invested in these characters, their feelings for one another, and just their feelings in general. So as long as you can get the audience invested in them, you make the audience care about them, you will be more likely to find success with a film adaptation. But if it turns out to be horrible, well, to be honest, I don't really care either way because we are in a James Cameron's Avatar release year, so nothing can bring me down at this point. I know that I will get to see some top-tier romance in 2025 regardless.
Your heartbeat is fast.
Sorry.
Try to focus.
Okay.